Hello, everyone. My name is LaPorchia Davis, and today I will be presenting my capstone titled Integrating Clinical Predictive Modeling and Imaging-Based Analysis to Identify Bone Health Complications in Burn Patients. Again, my advisor is Dr. Chiari, and I am excited to present what I've been working on. Current burns care pretty much focus heavily on surface healing, but deeper skeletal complications often go undetected. While clinicians monitor more so like the visible injuries, however, disruptions like calcium and vitamin D regulations can lead to fractures or osteomyelitis that only appear later on. So, therefore, the challenge is that predictive systems rarely combine clinical data and imaging, which limits early intervention. So, getting into the physical side, this slide shows how burn trauma leads to long-term skeletal issues. First, the injury triggers a stress response. Then the disruptions kind of affects like the calcium and tissue regulations. And then this leads to increased bone turnover and reduced density. And ultimately, patients face a higher risk of fractures or skeletal deficiencies. So, what is my hypothesis? My hypothesis is patients with more severe burns and poor bone health indicators are more likely to develop fractures or osteomyelitis. Additionally, CT imaging may reveal structural patterns that support future multimodal predictions. To address the aims, I develop both clinical and imaging aims. On the clinical side, I focus on identifying predictors of fracture risk and surgical outcomes. And on the imaging side, I extracted deep learning features from CT scans and explored how those patterns relate to burn severity and bone structure. For the pipeline overview, I decided to really combine a dual complementary analytical pipeline. On one side, for the clinical data, it shows the process in modeled using random forest and PCA. And then on the other side, the CT imaging is processed using CNN-based feature extractions and UMAP visualization. These pipelines come together perfectly to support a multimodal interpretation and also to generate those risk insights. So jumping into my data, I use two data sets. One for the clinical data set, I looked at a synthetic clinical data set with over 1,500 burn patients, and it has about 37 predictive variables. And on the CT imaging data set, I looked over about 5,000 images where I focused on 72 slice knee scans for detailed analysis. So this data set came from a professor from the University of South Dakota, and he was able to grant me access to the images that he have been collecting from about 24 different patients. And I also included the resolution details that kind of goes over the voxel spacings and also the slice thickness. For model comparisons, I tested multiple models and how the random forest performed the best, achieving the highest accuracy and handling class imbalance effectively. It also provided interpretable future importance, which is viable for the clinical insights. In the data set distribution, in this data set, it's about 25% of patients experienced fractures while osteomyelitis occurred in about 9%. This highlights a class imbalance, but also emphasizes that fractures are relatively common complication in severe burn patients. So looking at the clinical drivers here, this slide shows that burn severity strongly impacts the likelihood of skeletal complications. Deeper burns are associated with higher fracture and osteomyelitis rates. So additionally, features like hospital stay and severity index are closely linked to the outcomes. The next slide, I looked at a correlation heat map. Here we see a relationship between the clinical variables. So burn severity and bone damage matrix showed meaningful correlations with fractures and osteomyelitis outcomes, supporting the predictor value. So now we're going to look at the PCA results. So using PCA, I identified a distinct severity dimension. So patients with fractures clustered together in a more higher region, indicating that burn severity and bone damage created a clear predictive pattern. So diving into the deep learning pipeline, this image basically shows that I use a pre-trained ResNet 50 model. The CT slices were pre-processed, passed through the network, and transformed into a 2040 dimensional feature vector. And these features were then used to visualize the comparison. So jumping into the bone segmentation, I applied a threshold based segmentation to isolate the bone. So it pretty much removes soft tissues and allows the model to focus more on the structural bone features, improving the extraction. So this slide basically looks at the actual CT image that I used. And this slide shows the extracted bone mass from the CT slice. It basically highlights the high density bone regions while filtering out those surrounded tissues. So if you can see on the original slice, it's a bit noisy because of there's a little gray area on the right side. So as an imaging data scientist, we can't go in there and maneuver anything. We have to read the image as is, which is why I decided to do the bone mass so I can actually see what was actually going on with that image. So next we have the bone overlay. Here the bone mass is laid over the original CT image slice, and this helps more visually to confirm that segmentations is actually isolating that bone structure. For the UMAP comparison, when using the original CT slice, UMAP shows a smooth progression reflecting the anatomy of all of the slices. However, after the segmentation, I see a bit more of a clear cluster, and it also pretty much suggests that removing the soft tissue allows the model to focus more on those bone structural patterns. So the next step I did, I decided to take that CT image and apply it to a 3D slicer software. So this 3D slicer software would allow me to see what is actually going on with the image and also possibly do some interpretations. So basically what I did, I decided to send that image to a physician. However, his background is specialized in internal medicine instead of radiology. I was paired with this clinician, and based off his interpretation, the scan shows a displaced fracture tibial. This indicates several structural damage that supports the patterns of the predicted model. However, full diagnosis still require clinical correlations. So this physician stated that in order to fully understand what is going on with the image, he needed to know more about the patient's history. So, for integrating the findings, I can definitely say that with my hypothesis, it was somewhat answered yes and no. For the clinical side, it definitely is supported that bone severity and bone damage are strong predictors. And the imaging findings are exploratory but promising in showing that deep learning can capture meaningful structural patterns. So together, these results support the potential of a multimodal prediction. And for future work, I definitely see me diving more into more of a supervised fracture detection, using some UNet segmentations, and then also quantitative future extractions in addition to AR, VR applications, so I can actually see the clinical views of a bone. So I'm excited to kind of get the steps moving forward with this future research. And also, I definitely have to thank my collaborators and my advisor, and then also my mentors that actually helped me with the process of fully understanding imaging and getting me enthused about imaging science. And throughout the semester, I had an opportunity to present my research at the following conferences at the Kentucky University and Aim Ahead Southeast Hub Research Symposium. These are my references, and I am open for any questions.
Thanks, LaPorchia. Are there any questions?
Do you have plans to use the CNN to actually classify anything, or is that for that is in the future work?
Yes, that's in the future work.
One thing that you might explore is so you have all those slices, right? And you got the features for each of those. Well, one thing that you might be able to do is to combine all of the feature vectors from each slice in some sort of kind of aggregation method, and then use that essentially as a means of bypassing having to do a 3D CNN.
Oh, okay. I do like that. So I would definitely keep that in mind as I move this research forward. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good work.
Thank you. Any other
Any
questions?
more question?
I had a
Yes.
question.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead. I'll wait.
What did?
Okay. So
Go
for
ahead.
my
Go ahead, Ariana.
question, okay, so for my question, LaPortia, I wanted to know like what is the significance of using imaging along with the clinical data?
So clinical data alone just tell us about the risk factors like burn severity and the comorbidities, but it doesn't capture like the structural bone changes. So by incorporating like a CT image, we can identify like those patterns in bone structures that may yet be clinically visible. So in my study with the UMAP visualization, it shows that after bone segmentation, you kind of get clear structure clusters emerging. So this suggests that imaging as an additional layer of insight that kind of supports the development for more comprehensive predictive approaches.
All right, thank you and good job also.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ariana.
You
And Brian?
Yeah, I had a question. I just wanted to ask this kind of a two-parter. I wanted to ask LaPortia, what is the main limitation of your study? And I also wanted to ask about your data sets, which one you felt aided your research the most in comparison to each two.
Oh, wow. Okay. So for the limitations, because this study is more so exploratory, I have a few key limitations. One, the clinical data set is a synthetic one, which means that it may not fully capture like all the real world like vulnerabilities. And then for the imaging analysis, it was based on a limited sample. So, like I said, I only looked about at 72 slices per that particular case. And because of this, the imaging results are more so like a proof of concept rather than a full generalization. So my future work will focus on using real patient data and I would definitely say adding the imaging data set from that professor from the University of South Dakota who was gracious enough to send me over that data. I definitely would say that was one of the key elements because I had such a great experience at Novartis actually doing some imaging work that kind of really pushed me to focus more so on that.
Colin?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I heard you say that you used random forests, and I wanted to know like why did you choose that specific model over some of the others?
I definitely use random forest because it performed the best in terms of accuracy and overall balance. And because I kind of had to handle the class imbalance more effectively since the fractures and osteomyelitis cases were not evenly distributed across the data set. So it kind of captured a lot of the nonlinear relationships between the variables like the burn severity and hospital stay, and that provided future importance and which makes it a bit more interpretable for clinical use.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Graham, do you have
I
any
just
other
wanted to ask if you plan on continuing your PhD here.
Yes, I am, and I'm really excited about it.
Awesome.
Thank
Okay.
you.
I
Okay,
would like
thanks.
to say hi to
Yes.
everyone. LaPorchia
Hey,
invited me.
Gupta.
Hi,
LaPorchia
Dr.
invited me.
Gupta.
Yeah. So I thought
Hey,
like,
Dr. Gupta.
Good to see you
hi.
here.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Dr.
How,
Gupta. Thank you so much for coming.
yeah, it's a great work, LaPorchia. Yeah.
LaPorchia, I think we are almost out of time. So thanks, LaPorchia, and thanks everyone for the question.